Now we move to Salzamann nodular degeneration as another example of corneal degenerations. Actually, in 1923, Salzamann described these nodules as corneal dystrophy because it might happen bilateral. But afterwards, he retracted his word and he described it as a degeneration because he associated it usually to inflammation. So he could classify two kinds of Salzamann nodular degeneration, the primary type and the secondary type. So the primary type happens in old age ladies in the mid-periphery of a healthy cornea, not associated with keratitis, not associated with ocular surface disease. However, many reports described meibomian gland dysfunction in these cases and associated Salzamann nodular degeneration to the meibomian gland dysfunction and the ocular surface disease. The most common form of Salzamann nodular degeneration is a secondary form, usually associated with inflammation. It might resemble vernal keratoconjunctivitis, the limber reaction in vernal keratoconjunctivitis. It also happens in keratoplasty at the edge of Panus, either from VKC or from other ocular surface inflammation. It's bilateral elevated nodule anterior to Bowman's membrane. Not necessarily rounded, it might be irregular in shape. As you can see, there are here two nodules, typically in the mid-periphery of the cornea, not affecting the central part. And when we study the pathology, we will know that it's composed of hyaline material deposition and basement membrane. Basement membrane thickening and deposition of basement membrane material. That's why it's PAS positive, periodic acid Schiff stained. And usually it's not associated with fibrosis. It might be associated with iron lines, and it's avascular. This is a picture of the histopathology. So the full thickness of the cornea is of normal structure. There is thickening of the basement membrane, more evident with PAS stain, and there is areas of epithelial atrophy and epithelial hypertrophy, but usually there is epithelial thinning over the areas of thickened basement membrane, and there is basal cell layer edema, these green crosses, basal cell layer edema. As you can see, there is no fibrosis, but there is an entity called superficial nodular corneal scarring, in which Salzamann nodular degeneration might be associated with superficial scarring in the stroma, and this usually needs more than simple scraping or debridement. It's usually asymptomatic, might present with irritation or blurred vision. Blurred vision might happen on corneal opacification, central location of the Salzamann nodule, or irregular astigmatism. For the differential diagnosis, it needs to be differentiated from a dermoid. Dermoid might be limbal or might be in the mid-periphery of the cornea or even the center of the cornea. But a dermoid is present at birth, and histopathologically it contains myofibroblasts, which never happens in Salzamann nodular degeneration. Other differential diagnoses include keloid, include the limbal reaction in VKC, and flictin. Flictin is usually surrounded by blood vessel, more peripheral towards the limbus, might be associated with overlying corneal ulcer rather than the thinned epithelium in Salzamann nodular degeneration. And histopathologically, limbal reaction in VKC and flictin contain inflammatory cells like plasma cells, lymphocytes, and contains eosinophils in VKC. Treatment, as long as it's asymptomatic, so treatment number one is observation, topical lubrication if there is irritation, and superficial keratectomy, either by manual dissection or phototherapeutic keratectomy, and in superficial nodular corneal scarring, lamellar keratoplasty might be required. This screenshot is from one of the lessons on glaucoma, and I think we mentioned this MCQ question. All involve hemosiderin deposition in the basal corneal epithelial cells except Stoker's line, Ferris line, Fleischer ring, Kaiser-Fleischer ring, or overnight orthokeratology. And we said at this time that the correct answer was Kaiser-Fleischer ring because this was copper, not iron. As long as we are studying the cornea, we can change the options a little bit here. So I can add, for example, Mannes line and I can add also Salzamann nodules. And actually the answer will still be Kaiser-Fleischer ring. Mannes line is a deposition of iron internal to PKP sutures. This is Mannes line. And Salzamann nodules, as we just mentioned, shows line deposition at the leading edge of the hyaline deposition.